The next thing I want to discuss is retinal bleeding, so bleeding into the eye. You think, oh, that's terrible. How can you treat that? Well, I have to admit that when I first heard of this, I went like Wallace in the Wallace and Gromit. Help! What should I do? But the principle behind it is actually quite straightforward. Retinal bleeding is no different from bleeding anywhere else. And there are three main patterns causing it. One is heat in the blood. The blood becomes reckless and bursts out of its vessels. The second is the spleen doesn't hold the blood any longer, so the blood vessels become weak and then the blood comes out. And the third is that the heart is weak because the blood vessels, of course, are ruled by the heart, and so the blood vessels themselves become weak and irregular, and the blood leaks out for that reason. And once you bear that in mind, then the treatment becomes, the diagnosis and the treatment becomes relatively straightforward. Blood heat, you say, well, where is this blood heat coming from? You need maybe to clear the heat. The spleen deficiency, well, you need to strengthen the spleen and its ability to hold the blood. Weak heart, then you need to strengthen the heart. So there you are. It's easy. The difficult thing, of course, is in clinical practice, and I've got this case history. It's one I'm particularly pleased about because it so happened that I got a picture of the retina both before and afterwards. And this also is a very interesting case for me because it shows up a number of other things. So this patient is 54 years old. He's relatively healthy and has an active life. He's in the building profession and so has to be active. He carries a lot of stuff, physically active, so, appetite good, and so on. He looks quite healthy. His problem was that he got retinal bleeding, and the eye became very, very fuzzy. It started in the left eye, and he had laser treatment for this, which was a disaster because the laser treatment went wrong, and he was basically blinded in that eye. A couple of years later, the retinal bleeding started in the right eye, and he went back to the same hospital where again they offered him laser treatment, but understandably he didn't really want to go down that route because he feared that he might be blinded in that eye also. Now, just so that you know what we're talking about, as you can see in this picture here, you can see the blood leaking out into the retina. You should just see the arteries, not these terrible smudges of blood leaking out and white bits where there have been blood clots also. I'll just show the other eye in this picture also. The other eye has got two interesting features. One, you can see like a dirty smudge, which is where the laser treatment went wrong. It sort of burnt it a little bit or bruised it. But also you can see little flecks, it's the beginnings of what they call cotton wool flecks. Now, cotton wool flecks in the retina, when you see it like that, they are actually, from the Chinese medicine point of view, they're a sign of some lung problem, a tendency to lung problems. So it's interesting that you can look in the eye and see, lung problem. But on the other eye, we've got this retinal bleeding. What are we going to do about it? Well, let's look and see what else is going on with him. When he first came, his colour was rather a dull yellow colour. Now what's that mean? Which of these patterns should that be? It points towards spleen deficiency, doesn't it? So the next thing to do is ask him about his digestion. He's always had slight heartburn, but since Christmas, that's to say in the last 6 months or so, his stomach has been very painful. and he's been diagnosed as having acid reflux and always has a lot of burping. That's not a spleen Qi deficient pattern, is it? It's more a sign of heat, like it's the pain in this area, and uprising Qi is a sign more of stomach heat. What's going on? What else do we see about him? Limbs are quite good, they're fine. Pulse is a bit slow. Pulse is a little bit weaker in the heart position. And the right-hand pulse is very full and slippery in the lung position, once again confirming our suspicions about the lung. Other pulses are sort of more or less okay. So, and then what about the tongue? The colour is good, a little pale perhaps, with some large cracks on it. So what have we got? Well, not very much, except for the retinal bleeding and the indigestion. How do we approach this? What have we got? Where can we go to? What's the main place to attack? We know that retinal bleeding can either be a weak heart, but he's had tests on his heart, it doesn't seem to be weak, or it can be a weak spleen, and yet his spleen doesn't seem to be a problem at all. He can eat anything. He gets pain in his stomach, but it's not. He doesn't get bloating or diarrhea or heavy limbs, or he doesn't need to sleep a lot. His concentration's all right. There's no special spleen signs. So what does that leave behind? Blood heat. How is the heat getting into the blood? Well, it's not very obvious. And indeed, the heat itself is not very obvious at first sight. But we know that that's all that's left. That's what it must be. And how is it getting in? It must be getting in through the stomach. And so if you've got persistent stomach heat, how do you think? What's causing this persistent stomach heat? Well, my opinion is that if you're continuing to get stomach heat, there's two possibilities. Either you're worrying all the time, or else you're eating something which disagrees with you. And so I looked at him and I thought, is he worrying a lot? No, not especially. Is he angry a lot? No, not especially. In that case, it must be something that he's eating. So by a process of elimination, I decided to change his diet. And I advised him to take the food combining diet, I think it's called, where you have protein and carbohydrate separately. I also advised him to keep off wheat or bread in particular for a while. So he did this on my advice, and actually very quickly his stomach pain started to reduce. So I was on the right track there. It was a diet-related problem which was causing the stomach pain, and indeed causing stomach heat. And it's once again, I think it was this thing I've mentioned earlier, that when you don't digest wheat well, it easily transforms to heat. And I think that's what was going on with this person. Interestingly, what happened as the treatment progressed and his energy started to circulate better, he started to get a bright red face. And I was relieved by that, because I said, oh yes, I was right. And what had happened was that the heat was there, but his qi had reduced a little bit, so it was sort of hidden somewhat. In his case, what I did was I did points like stomach 44 to clear the stomach heat. That's a great point because it also helps the eyes. I did large intestine 4, again, which will help to clear the stomach heat. And of course, that also goes to the eyes. I did gallbladder 20, and every time that he came, I would do Cho Ho point, as deep as it was needed to get to the qi sensation at the back of the eye. Now, it was very interesting when I treated him that the first few treatments, the eyes were quite deficient, and I could easily put the needle in, 2 inches, like 45, 50 millimeters, before he got sensation at the back. It easily slipped in like that. And the third treatment, the full nature of the pattern started to appear, the fact that it was full blood heat. And I only needed to put it in like, 1/2 to 1 sun. And already there was a terrifically strong chi sensation affecting the whole of the eye. And so at that point I could use like a dispersing technique on that point. So he came weekly for about 6 to 8 treatments, then had intermittent treatments, and then you can see he had a picture of his retina taken 6 months later, and you can see there's been like a vast improvement in the retinal bleeding. So that shows it's possible. It was nice for me to see like a before and after picture. One doesn't always get these. Now, I mentioned about the lung pattern, the cotton wool flecks and their relation to the lungs. It's interesting. I think he also had this so-called TB miasm, in the sense that he loved being outside, that outside was terribly important. He hated being inside. That's very, very characteristic of people don't like to be constrained. So underlying it, there was an underlying, you could say metal-wood imbalance, but it was very, very deeply buried. Towards the end of the treatment, he started to mention a problem which had been there for a long time, a very slight heaviness in the chest, and he was a little bit worried about it, and it felt like a tightness after exercise. Yes, there you are. That's the lung problem. It is still there. The retinal bleeding in this case was caused by blood heat. I would say it is quite a common cause of it. If you clear the heat, then you can stop the retinal bleeding. You can reverse the condition. I would say, in his case, I used this local point on a regular basis, as well as clearing the heat in the body.